And outside of Africa, Pope Leo XIV has renewed his call for peace, urging an end to attacks on civilians in Ukraine and Russia. Speaking during the Angelus prayer at the Vatican, the Pope expressed concerns over the humanitarian impact of ongoing conflicts and called for greater protection of civilians. He also appealed for an immediate ceasefire in Sudan, where fighting has worsened an already severe humanitarian crisis. Pope Leo stressed the need to respect international humanitarian law, warning that continued warfare only creates further suffering. His appeal comes as violence persists in Ukraine and Sudan, with international efforts continuing to secure peace and deliver assistance to affected communities. To discuss more on this, we're joined by a foreign policy analyst, Bolu Michael Biyi. Bolu, it's always nice to have you around to talk about this.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so beyond appeals and diplomatic pressure, can anything realistically be done to bring the Russia-Ukraine war to an end?
Yes, I think so. But, let's start with the problem. The core issue is that the military momentum is currently outweighing diplomatic incentives. And that means that both sides, they believe they can achieve their maximum goals through negotiation alone. And from what we've been seeing so far, especially in a couple of days, civilian deaths have surged by over a third in just the first half of this year, and that's driven by escalating drone attacks on both sides. We know that Ukraine, they have that capacity to produce as many drones. I think they're among the top 3 on Earth right now, and they have that capacity. But when it comes to advanced weapons, Russia kind of has a slight lead. And, having this rise in civilian deaths shows that the conflict is intensifying and is not de-escalating anytime soon, despite global appeal from, important figures such as the Pope and also top bodies like the United Nations. So the real constraint is the absence of a hurting stalemate. As long as both sides believe that they can still gain some territory or some authority through the use of arms, they would continue to push their lockers as far as they could go.
Yeah.
So they need to see that there's no incentive in war before they can sit at the negotiation table again.
Of course, I'm actually following this story, and I'm aware that, several international mediation efforts have been made to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine. Why is it that these efforts have not, in some way produced some appreciable results in bringing about lasting peace? We know that the Israel-US-Iran, conversations, diplomatic talks are ongoing. Is a bit, in staccato, but we see progress. Why is it that the Russia-Ukraine crisis is not following that line?
Yeah, this war has dragged for about 4.5 years now. And the reason why mediation fails is because the fundamental security demands of both sides are mutually exclusive, and they have non-negotiables. Ukraine's non-negotiables, clashes with Russia's non-negotiables. And this means that they cannot have that conversation because they have lines that must not be crossed. And that's why it's dragging for so long, and mediation is failing. And the proof of this is that the UN reports, have stated that about 16,000 civilians have been killed in the last 4.5 years. And the majority of them are within the part of the Ukrainian forces. That's a large majority, on the Ukrainian side, and that shows that there's a gap between security for Russia and the sovereignty for Ukraine, and that's bridge has not been, and that gap has not been bridged yet. And I feel that systemic constraint is the lack of a credible enforcement mechanism. If there's no third party that is willing to guarantee some form of security or impose severe penalties for violating a deal, then the other side is going to trust each other even if they put in place a ceasefire. So that's national bodies must come in and set in place a credible enforcement mechanism.
Yeah, so you're talking about international bodies coming in now. And, despite the huge amount and material costs of this particular war, we see that global attention appears to have shifted to other conflicts and other personal areas of interests. Now, does it just mean, or does it mean in a way that these global institutions or international institutions are actually weak when it comes to influencing peace efforts that could end conflicts like this?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that international institutions are weak. That they are actually quite powerful and influential. It's just that they are suffering from what I'll call an attention fatigue and also resource fragmentation. The world has moved on. A lot has happened within the last 4.5 years. We've had the oil crisis and all that. A lot of things have come up that have overrun and have become the priority of this international organization. So they are actually quite tired of this war, because it seems like both sides are really defiant and really strong as regards their, not even discussing or touching their non-negotiables. And for example, we see the UN Human Rights Office. They documented the rising civilian injuries and deaths, and the global focus has kind of splintered ever since, and that allows the conflict to drag and fester, and we've seen so many drone attacks multiplying without any unified global response. And it's quite common that this attention fatigue and resource fragmentation would happen, as we've seen in previous wars. So this is not any different. And the one major constraint is the veto power of the UN Security Council, and that prevents the formation of a unified, enforceable international will when major powers are directly or indirectly involved. So these are the issues pitting, and it's making the war to drag longer than usual.
Even at the end of the day, we see lives being lost, properties being destroyed, infrastructure being decimated. Something needs to be done. Bolu Michael B., thank you so much for your time on the news.
Thank you for having me.